Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 4, Devolution, from the Lost Word, Its Hidden Meaning by George H. Steinmetz. Chapter 3, Devolution. The postulate of the modern evolutionist begins with the life urge in the amoeba stage. Modern science asserts that over a period of literally millions of years, this life, which it cannot define, has evolved upward into that animated physical being which we designate Homo sapiens. One of the difficulties of this hypothesis is the inability of its proponents to construct an endless chain to account for this evolution. Darwin, one of the foremost advocates of the theory, conceived a hypothetical intermediate form, a common ancestor from which the anthropoid ape and man diverged. But the very inability of science to find any trace or remains of such a creature has been responsible for the introduction into the English language of the phrase, the missing link. An axiom of biology is that the individual development recapitulates the life history of the species. Man begins his individual existence as a single-celled animal, a protozoon. His original prenatal development is by cell division and multiplication. The ovum divides into 2 cells. These 2 cells each divide and produce 4, and so on ad infinitum. The embryo passes through definite stages of development until the end of the 3rd month, when it first appears as a fairly complete human form. According to Dr. George A. Dorsey, during our prenatal days we live fast. We can be certain of that. In a few days we have developed structures that were evolved only after tens of millions of years. The vast majority of animals have no backbone and are called invertebrates. One of the greatest steps in evolution was a backbone or vertebral column. 3 types were tried out before vertebrates developed a true backbone. All 3 types or stages appear in the developing human embryo. Shark embryos have 5 gill arches with openings, or gill clefts, between, and 2 branchial arches from which the shark forms its poorly developed lower jaw. Most of these arches and the branchial clefts between appear at the 3rd week in the human fetus. The way the clefts disappear and the arches develop into the extraordinarily complicated human throat is possibly the most interesting and confused chapter in human embryology. At the time the gill clefts are present, the human fetus has a freely projecting tail and 4 tiny paddle-like limbs. Eventually, the fetus develops into purely human form and is born into the world a human being. Despite all the evidence which science marshals to support its theory of evolution, Orthodox Christianity disputes its findings. Adopting a fundamentalistic attitude and accepting literally the biblical account of the origin of man, the Church proclaims man to be a special creation of the Creator. It avers he arrived upon the earthly scene with most of his faculties, especially and above all possessed of a soul, which word is used synonymously with spirit. Lest there be any question of correctly representing the Church in this matter, we quote as follows. What is man? Man is a creature composed of body and soul, note absence of any mention here of spirit, and made to the image and likeness of God. Is this likeness to God in the body or in the soul? This likeness to God is chiefly in the soul. How is the soul like God? The soul is like God because it is a spirit having understanding and free will and is destined to live forever. A Catechism of Christian Doctrine, Revised Edition 1941, Baltimore Catechism. St. Anthony Press, Patterson, N.J., bearing the imprimatur of Thomas H. McLaughlin, Bishop of Patterson. These 2 theories are so diametrically opposed that both cannot be entertained. The material scientist is therefore placed in the position of denying the biblical narrative as a myth. The intelligent Orthodox Christian is forced to turn his back on the prompting of his intelligence and accept a theory which his intellect informs him is an absurdity in the light of his material and scientific knowledge. Is there no possibility of compromising these 2 divergent theories? May it not be highly possible that each contain elements of truth which, when discovered, will show them to be parts of one and the same original doctrine of the origin of man? Yes, brethren, look to the East. Literally look to the East. Turn to the sacred books of the East, and it is discovered that the Bible is but a fragmentary synopsis brought by those first travelers who migrated from India to Egypt and Chaldea, where the doctrine was treasured by priests who carved it in hieroglyphics upon temple and tomb, perpetuated it upon manuscripts of papyrus, and in cuneiform characters on tablets of clay. Their instructive tongues confided it to, the attentive ears of their initiates in the mysteries, who in turn preserved it in their faithful breasts. From the Egyptians and later from the Babylonians and Chaldeans, the Jews obtained many religious and philosophic concepts which, intermingled with the ideas of their own wise men and religious leaders, have been preserved in their sacred books, which we now call our Holy Bible. Breasted goes to considerable length to compare Ichnaton's hymns in praise of Aton with the Psalms and the wisdom of Amenemope with the Decalogue and Proverbs. Of the wisdom of Amenemope, he states, "This ultimate intensity of conscience and God consciousness in the teachings of an Egyptian thinker in the 10th century BC, before any of the Old Testament was written, is the more remarkable, because we now know that the wisdom of Amenemope was translated into Hebrew. It was read by Hebrews, and an important part of it found its way into the Old Testament." To sum up, Breasted writes, "Had the Western world never lost all knowledge of the origins and development of civilization, it would never have occurred to anyone to place Hebrew history, the Bible, anywhere else than as the culmination of a long preceding development of morals and religion. Certainly no theological doctrine of one people exclusively enjoying a divine revelation could ever have arisen. A doctrine which has blinded us for centuries to our noble inheritance of universal human aspiration, not limited to the history or the experience of any one people." Turn then to those ancient books which antedate even the Egyptian records. They contain a full and detailed account of cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis. True, this account is veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, but he who can pierce the veil and understand the symbols will discover it is largely in agreement with modern science. He will find the nebula theory, the theory of Copernicus, thousands of years before the birth of the man to whom we credit it. The modern atomic theory and knowledge of the primordial substance and transmutation of the elements. These records likewise account for the missing link of the evolutionist and agree with him as to the necessity. They place it in its proper position in the evolutionary sequence. They concur in the biblical assertion that man is a special creation made in the image and likeness of his creator, and a little lower than the angels. At the same time, this ancient doctrine harmonizes the apparently divergent theories of science and religion, offering an explanation which permits the intellectual acceptance of the biblical narrative in the light of modern scientific discoveries. If then these ancient records can reconcile modern scientific and modern religious thought, if what they say of the evolution of man can be proven scientifically correct, may we not with confidence rely on what they have to say of the previous devolution of man to the estate where both science and religion begin their theories? So-called exact science is not interested in man's devolution from the spiritual to the material state. It is admittedly materialistic and deals only with phenomena which can be verified by controlled laboratory methods. Religion is not interested in man's devolution, for having accepted the fact which is briefly touched upon in the Bible, religion's professed objective is to assist man in regaining his spiritual estate. Freemasonry likewise has the same objective, and its teachings therefore do not concern themselves with devolution. However, one portion of the ritual, if analyzed, furnishes evidence that Masonic philosophy is cognizant of the fact of devolution. This is contained in the very first question, and the answer in the entered apprentice's proficiency examination. This, coupled with the answer to the second question, indicates a definite knowledge of the fact of devolution and the remedy. This second answer is invariably given as though the candidate came here to do two things, that is, 1, to learn to subdue my passions, and 2, to improve myself in Freemasonry. Our early English brethren were more conservative than we of today in committing ritual to writing, and therefore we cannot refer to this answer in writing and observe the punctuation. To be consistent with the teaching that the 3 degrees deal with the 3 planes of being, the candidate should come here to do 3 things, one affecting each plane of being. If this answer was given thus, to learn to subdue my passions and to improve myself in Freemasonry, we should have activity on each plane. To learn, the psychical advancement of the individual. To subdue my passions, control and subjugation of the physical and material. To improve myself in Freemasonry, spiritual unfoldment. In the first volume of the lately published Introduction à l'étude des races humaines by Monsieur de Quatrefages, There is proof that since the post-tertiary period, and even before that time, since many races were already scattered during that age on the face of the earth, man has not altered one iota in his physical structure. And if surrounded for ages by a fauna that altered from one period or cycle to another, which died out, which was reborn in other forms, so that now there does not exist one single animal on earth, large or small, contemporary with the man of that period, if then every animal has been transformed save man himself, this fact goes to prove not only his antiquity, but that he is a distinct kingdom. Why should he alone have escaped transformation? Because, says De Quatrefages, the weapon used by him in his struggle with nature and the ever-changing geological conditions and elements was his psychic force, not his physical strength or body. As in the case of animals, give man only that dose of intelligence and reason with which other mammalia are endowed, and with his present bodily organization, he will show himself the most helpless of creatures of earth. And as everything goes to prove that the human organism, with all its characteristics, peculiarities, and idiosyncrasies, existed already on our globe in those far distant geological periods, when there was not yet one single specimen of the now existing forms of mammalia, what is the unavoidable conclusion? Why this? Since all the human races are of one and the same species, it follows that this species is the most ancient of all the now living mammalia. Therefore, it is the most stable and persevering of all, and was already as fully developed as it is now, when all the other mammalia now known had not made even their first approach to appearance on this earth. It is the ancient teaching that man was originally a spiritual being, partaking of the attributes of his creator. Man in that state did not possess self-consciousness, and the only way he could acquire that faculty was to embody or manifest in material physical form. Such a suitable animal form did not exist. Just as we know that a hybrid cannot be produced by crossing the human with any known animal, so was it impossible for the spiritual man to enter any of the existing animal forms, their rates of vibration being too low to withstand the advent of the spiritual. A special creation of an animal or physical man is to us a philosophical necessity, and according to the ancient teachings, was an actual necessity in which these spiritual beings might incarnate. These bodies were therefore created by certain of the gods, the Elohim of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew word translated God in Genesis 1:1 is Elohim. This is a plural ending, and this verse should properly read the gods, etc. It is the contention of Albert Pike, which he proves to be true beyond reasonable argument, that the ideas of Philo-Judaeus are identical with those of the Irano-Aryans, and that the Gnostics adopted most of the doctrines of Philo, especially these: that the Supreme Being is a source of lights, whose rays or emanations permeate the universe, that the lights and shadows in all-time hostile principles dispute with each other the empire of the world, that the world has been created not by the Supreme Being, but by a secondary agent who is but his word and according to types that are but his ideas, assisted by an intelligence, a Sophia, wisdom, which is but one of his attributes, that the visible world is the image of the invisible world, that the essence of the human soul is the image of God and it existed before the body, etc. These ideas, says Pike, are to be found in substance in the Veda or the Zendavesta. Here again, a digression is necessary to prevent possible misunderstanding. The ancients were not polytheists, as might be construed by the mention of gods. They were monotheists, believing in one supreme being. Their recognition of the limitations of the finite mind, coupled with a humility and lack of intellectual conceit, conspicuous by its absence in us moderns, brought the realization of their inability to know or understand God. Therefore, they had separate names for various emanations or powers of the deity. Later, as the secret knowledge was lost to man, he degenerated into polytheism and actually worshipped these powers as separate gods under their various names. As Krishna is quoted in our preface, "This noble teaching hath decayed and its light grown dim. Almost lost hath become its inner spirit, and men know naught but its letter. Such is ever the fate of truth among the race of men." It is not the intent here to review the secret doctrine in detail. Those interested and desirous of further light on the subject may abundantly obtain it from the Vedas or Madame Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine or Isis Unveiled. The following quotations from the Secret Doctrine are sufficient for our present purpose. It is a universal tradition that before the physiological fall, Propagation of one's kind, whether human or animal, took place through the will of the creators or of their progeny. It was the fall of spirit into generation, not the fall of mortal man. It has already been stated that to become a self-conscious spirit, the latter must pass through every cycle of being, culminating in its highest point on earth in man. Here we discover agreement with the scientific explanation of the development of the human fetus, and the assertion of science that it experiences all the stages of evolution during the 9 months in the womb. See page 22. Man and woman on the side of the father, spirit, refers to primary creation, and on the side of the mother, matter, to the secondary. The twofold man is Adam Kadmon, the male and female abstract prototype, and the differentiated Elohim. Man proceeds from the Dian Chohan and is a fallen angel, a god in exile, as will be shown. Blavatsky does not attempt to translate these metaphysical terms, bearing out our previous contention that in many instances there is no English equivalent. It is only after the so-called fall that the races begin to develop rapidly into a purely human shape. Sentences such as, "In his Satan's ambition he raises his hand against the sanctuary of the God of heaven," etc., ought to read, "Prompted by the law of eternal evolution and karma, the angel incarnated on earth in man, and as his wisdom and knowledge are still divine, although his body is earthly, he is, allegorically, accused of divulging the mysteries of heaven." It is further stated that man, as allegorically pictured in the Garden of Eden before the fall, was possessed of a grade of consciousness similar to that of the present higher animals, guided by instinct and conscious but not self-conscious. It is no mistranslation of the Hebrew wherein the Bible states that Adam knew Eve. Neither is this attempted delicacy in referring to the sexual act, as some authorities have explained. A moment of reflection will reveal the fallacy of the latter assumption, as in other instances no such false modesty is exhibited, and even a casual reader of the Bible soon discovers that these old writers had no hesitancy in plainly expressing themselves. In this instance, the writer wrote exactly as he intended. Adam knew Eve. That is, he had arrived at the level of self-consciousness where he was cognizant of himself as an individual entity and recognized Eve as another and distinct individual apart from himself. Previously, he was unconscious of the act of propagation. Now, upon the acquisition of self-consciousness, he knowingly performed the act. Further proof of this thesis is contained in the sentence that henceforth the woman would bear children in pain. Having previously been unconscious of self, she was likewise unconscious of the pain of childbirth. The advent of self-consciousness made her cognizant of both the self and the pain endured by the self. The Bible states, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." There are many myths concerning the creation of man, as widely scattered amongst the peoples of the earth as the African savage, the North American Indian, and the Japanese. Most of these myths include the 4 elements in their makeup, and a composite of them would recite approximately as follows: God took the dust of the ground, earth, and mixed it with water. This he kneaded into a dough and molded into the form of man, which he baked in an oven or kiln, fire. When he had finished, he had breathed air into the nostrils of the inanimate form, and it became a living being. Thus, by these various accounts, man is literally composed of earth, water, fire, and air. Here is the theme of devolution from the spiritual to the material. Having made this form, God breathed his breath, spirit, into it, thus imprisoning spirit in its tomb of matter. The Bible evinces little interest in man's primary devolution. Its sole interest is to relate how he may regain that which was lost, how he may evolve again to his spiritual estate through the subjugation of his material and psychical natures, thereby allowing the spiritual to predominate. The Bible teaches how humanity must first come to a realization of its own divinity and then regain that divinity. This is the ultimate objective of both the Bible and Freemasonry. They are identical, for Freemasonry is an allegorical, symbolical exposition of the same teaching. As Albert Pike defines Freemasonry, it is the subjugation of the human that is in man by the divine, the conquest of the appetites and passions by the moral sense and the reason. In the Bible, this ascent from the purely material to the spiritual is allegorically described, as we have observed in the introductory chapter. In Masonic symbolism, it is indicated in the 24-inch gauge, The 24-inch gauge is first a horizontal, the material. Next, by turning up 1/3, an angle of 90 degrees or the 1/4 part of a circle, a square is formed. This is the addition of the perpendicular, the psychic. By bringing the two ends together, an equilateral triangle is formed, the symbol of the spiritual. The arrangement of the square and compasses upon the altar shows the same progression. First, the square is predominant, then entwined with the compasses. And in the spiritual degree, the compasses, emblem of the spiritual, come to the fore with the material square forming but a background. Again, it is repeated with the apron. Can the doctrine be more clearly illustrated with symbols, and in view of the repetition, can there be any doubt of its meaning? Any study of Freemasonry which ignores the astrological implications and aspects of its symbology is necessarily incomplete. While many present-day Masons may scoff at the mention of astrology in connection with Freemasonry, the fact remains beyond dispute that much of its symbolism is of astrological origin and cannot otherwise be explained. Without the astrological explanation, it is meaningless, and most interpretations which have sought to ignore this origin but result in puerility. As outstanding examples, we find the stations of the three principal officers and the recital of their duties, containing the analogy in each instance to the sun, the likening of the worshipful master to the sun and moon, even though the simile is inaccurate. Again, we have the two columns which derive deviously but nevertheless surely from the summer and winter solstices. And to supply the capstone of evidence, there is the point within the circle, ancient Egyptian symbol for the sun, and likewise the present-day astronomical symbol for that great luminary. The zodiac is divided into 12 equal parts, and to each is allotted a sign. These signs are first grouped in 3 divisions: the cardinal, the fixed, and the common signs, each group consisting of 4 signs. This division is apparently founded upon the ancient Chaldean doctrine that the Lord of the Zodiac, or Grand Man, functioned through a spiritual triad called the Father, the Power, and the Mind. Thus the cardinal signs are the fathers, the fixed signs are the powers, and the common signs are the minds, resulting in the triplicities of the elements, each of which is composed of the trinity of a father, a power, and a mind. Modern astrology has not progressed far enough to understand or analyze the 3 spiritual bodies. The frequent references to them by the ancients indicates they possessed a thorough knowledge of them, their functions and significance. But we have not yet rediscovered their esoteric implications and, one might add, application. They would come into play in spiritual astrology, and the chart would need be prepared after the Copernican or heliocentric theory rather than the Ptolemaic system commonly employed. The zodiac showing the ancient illustrations of the signs and their designating symbols. These signs are likewise designated by the 4 elements. Therefore, there is of necessity 3 signs in each of 4 divisions. These 4 divisions are as seen here. The signs are so spaced around the circle of the zodiac that a line drawn from one of the cardinal, fixed and common signs to the second like sign, thence to the third like sign, then to the fourth, and back to the first, will produce a geometrical figure of 3 squares within a circle whose angles form a 12-pointed star. Each square is therefore composed of 1 sign each of the 4 elements. 4 equilateral triangles may also be formed within the zodiacal circle by drawing a line from one to another of the 3 signs of the 4 elemental groups. That is, connect each of the 3 fiery signs, each of the airy signs, each of the earthy signs, and each of the watery signs. For the benefit of the Masonic student not versed in astrology, a review of the origin and meaning of the zodiacal signs might appear to be in order. Such a task, however, is entirely beyond the scope of this volume. There are many good books devoted exclusively to the subject. The reader desirous of more detail is referred to the volumes of Manly Hall and Max Heindel listed in the bibliography. The square and triangle are ancient symbols and are occultly explained by the ancient thesis that man has 7 vehicles or bodies. The oldest and best preserved gospel of the Gnostics is Pistis Sophia. According to this extraordinary piece of religious literature, the human entity is the septenary ray from the One, just as our school teaches. It is composed of 7 elements, 4 of which are borrowed from the 4 Kabbalistical manifested worlds. Thus, from Asia it gets the nefesh, or seat of the physical appetites, vital breath also. From Yetzirah, the ruach, or seat of the passions. From Braya, the neshama, and from Aziluth, it obtains the chaya, or principle of spiritual life. This looks like an adaptation of the Platonic theory of the souls obtaining its respective faculties from the planets in its downward progress through their spheres. We may here point out that they, the 7 planets, are in truth the Sephiroth emanations of the Kabbalists, the 7 gifts of the Holy Ghost in the Christian system, and in a mystical sense the 7 children or sons of Devaki killed before the birth of Krishna by Kansa. Our 7 principles symbolize all of these. We have to part or separate from them before we reach the Krishna or Christ state, that of Jivan Mukta, and center ourselves entirely in the highest, the 7th or the One, the Secret Doctrine. Volume 2, page 604. 4 of these bodies are classified as material and 3 as spiritual. Each body is credited with its own rate of vibration, peculiar unto itself, the varying rates of vibration accounting for the differences between the bodies, beginning with the lowest rate of vibration, that of the physical or dense body. Ascending the scale, the next is the vital or etheric body, next the emotional or desire body, and 4th the mental body. It is to be noted that the mental body is included among the material bodies. It is the link between the lower 3 material bodies and the 3 spiritual bodies. It is the mirror which reflects the outer world and enables the ego to transmit its orders to the 3 lowest bodies in the scale. Of the 3 spiritual bodies, the lowest in the scale is the human spirit, next the life spirit, and the highest the divine spirit. Reversed in order they are the fathers, powers and minds mentioned by Manly Hall, whom we previously quoted. Mention has been made of the biblical representation of man as composed of body, soul and spirit. This account of man's 3-fold composition is not necessarily contradictory of the ancient 7-fold concept, but rather, one might say, an abbreviation thereof. The Bible groups the 3 lowest material bodies in one classification as body. As the mental body differs both in composition, rate of vibration, and function, it is separated from the other 3 material bodies and called soul. The 3 spiritual bodies are not differentiated and collectively are referred to as spirit. Figure 1. Figure 2. Plate 1. With this explanation of the 7 bodies of man, we begin to focus some light upon the Masonic apron. In ancient symbology, the 3 spiritual bodies are indicated by a triangle, and as the flap of the apron is triangular, we discover it to be the symbol of the spiritual bodies. The square portion of the apron, and to be correct symbolically, the apron should be square, is representative of the 4 material bodies. We appreciate the fact that the apron of masonry was not always square. Early aprons were patterned after the utilitarian apron of the operative mason, which actually prevented soiling the clothing. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, elaborate aprons were worn, on which were embroidered the various emblems of the craft. Apparently, those conversant with the deeper meaning of the apron gradually impressed their ideas on the various grand jurisdictions. And today, our plain white lambskin apron is truly symbolic. As worn by the entered apprentice, the apron presents the appearance of a triangle above a square. This symbology informs that the spiritual is hovering over the material but has not yet entered therein. This is the molded form of man into whose nostrils God is about to breathe the breath of life. The fellow craft's apron indicates the descent of spirit into matter, for on viewing it we behold a triangle within a square. Some few jurisdictions reverse the order of wearing the apron by the master mason and the fellow craft, by having the latter wear his apron with the corner turned up. They offer the rational explanation that worn thus it forms a pocket in which the fellow craft may carry his working tools, if our understanding of the occult symbology is correct. And if it is the idea to progress toward the triangular apron of the Egyptian mysteries, then the sequence of the positions, as stated above, is to be preferred. The master's apron, when properly worn, with one corner turned up, is but a triangle. Many Egyptian tombs and monuments picture the ancient Egyptians garbed in the triangular apron. See illustrations. Triangular apron of the Egyptian mysteries. Figure 1 shows the pharaoh Ramesses the Great offering cups of wine in the temple, BC 1322. Figure 2, the hierogrammat or sacred scribe. It will be observed that an apron is part of the regalia, each of a different pattern according to their rank and office. Figure 3, the apron of the mysteries was of a triangular form. Illustrations and notes from stellar theology and Masonic astronomy. It symbolizes the final effacement of the square, symbol of the material, the ultimate triumph of the spiritual, the release of the spiritual man from his tomb of matter, see plate 5, and the objective of the master mason finally achieved. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.